What's up guys, Jay Vincent here. In today's video, I'm going to react to a recent video published by popular influencer named Jeremy Ethier. Haven't really been able to figure out how to pronounce his last name, but I believe it's Ethier because he is French Canadian. Now I haven't watched this full video yet, but I know it is about stretch mediated hypertrophy. Now if you've been following me and my channel for the last few years, you would know that I am not an advocate of stretch training. I've said from the beginning that it is not going to produce any superior muscle hypertrophy in the long run doing these loaded stretch position repetitions. And the reason I said that was because I understand the actual mechanisms of muscle physiology and the mechanisms of stimulating muscle hypertrophy. So we're gonna watch this video, and apparently Jeremy conducted an experiment, an attempt to prove stretch mediated hypertrophy wrong. From the looks of it, I think he did.
But before we get there, it's important to understand what the stretch actually means and where all the hype came from. So we've actually known about the benefits of stretching a muscle for growth since the 1970s. It started when researchers hung weights from the wings of chickens to stretch their lat muscles. An odd experiment, I'll admit, but just from this stretch alone, the chicken's lats grew by 170%.
Now, starting off, here's a problem with that study. Any mechanical tension placed on the muscle, whether you are contracting the muscle or producing mechanical tension by loading the muscle or stretching the muscle, even if you were to just stretch your own muscles without additional weight, that is enough to stimulate some hypertrophy. And where people began to misunderstand this is that, well, since they loaded the chicken's muscle in a stretch position and it hypertrophied, well, that must mean if we load the muscles during resistance training, it's going to produce more hypertrophy. But there's a logical error here. The reason they had to load the chicken's muscle in a stretch position was to be able to produce mechanical tension, because the chicken can't lift weights. We are able to lift weights and produce voluntary contractions against the resistance, which is much more efficient and productive for recruiting muscle and stimulating mechanical tension. But I think a lot of people don't understand that the goal of exercise is just muscle fiber recruitment and producing mechanical tension in the muscle fibers we recruit. Anything you do that places load on your muscles or provides resistance for your muscles to contract against is going to recruit some muscle fibers and produce mechanical tension in those fibers. But we lift weights and we do exercises in order to do that much more efficiently. So that study is useless when it comes to resistance training and resistance training principles.
Then, in humans, they tried something similar: extreme loaded stretching. They tested this on the chest and even on the calves, where my friend Dr. Eric Helms wore an intense stretching calf boot for an hour a day. Both muscle groups saw almost as much growth from loaded stretching as you would expect from normal strength training. This gave researchers a clue that something about stretching the muscles seems to be a powerful.
And again, with the human trials, basically they're just comparing producing mechanical tension in an efficient, safe way by lifting weights versus producing mechanical tension simply by stretching the muscle or loading the muscle in the stretch position. And the reason why this happens is because of something called your stretch reflex. Now what happens is when you fully lengthen a muscle, you have something in your muscles called muscle spindles and something in your tendons called the Golgi tendon organ. And what they do is they talk to your spinal cord, they talk to your nervous system. And when the mechanical tension is experienced in the stretch position, there's an involuntary signal sent to your spinal cord to tell the muscle to contract to avoid dangerous positions of the range of motion which might hurt you. So it's more of an involuntary muscle fiber recruitment mechanism. The mechanism is trying to protect you. So by providing additional load in a position where the joint is unsafe makes absolutely no sense at all. Because as you can see, you can produce the same amount of mechanical tension and muscle fiber recruitment more safely by just contracting the muscles through an effective, safe range of motion.
Signal for growth. So they wondered, how can we transfer these odd stretch benefits into normal training? One way they tested this was by comparing tricep pushdowns to overhead tricep extensions, which places the long head of your triceps into a deeper stretch. That deep stretch led to 1.4 times the growth. Remember this exercise, because later on, you'll learn why exactly it works so well for the triceps. But What if you didn't just stretch the muscle more, but actually challenge the muscle most when it's stretched?
Now, when it comes to these exercises like an overhead triceps extension where the triceps is in a lengthened position, in a position of shoulder flexion, the reason that these groups likely found more growth benefit from those exercises was not because you're loading the muscle in the stretch position. It's because there was a higher amount of effort involved in that exercise. So a lot of the times when people do stretch mediated hypertrophy exercises or stretch training, what they end up doing is they end up slowing down the movement significantly, resulting in more continuous muscular loading and more aggressive fatigue and muscle fiber recruitment, and also more effort because it's more difficult. And since we know that the amount of effort put forth into the exercise is directly correlated to how many motor units and muscle fibers your body will recruit and stimulate, well, then that makes sense. The problem is, it's just a really stupid way of increasing effort. A more logical and a more safe way of increasing effort is simply to train to muscle failure.
But the deeper I looked, the more I realized there were 3 serious gaps in the research that no one was really talking about. First of all, almost every study showing that training in the stretch helps muscle growth has only been done on the biceps, quads, or calves, because they're easier and cheaper to test. But other muscles don't stretch the same way. But second, many of these studies, they compare totally different exercises. For example, preacher curls versus incline curls. Preacher curls hit the biceps hardest in the stretch, and they did show more growth in one study, but they also lock your arm in place, making it harder to cheat. So was the extra growth from the stretch challenge, or the extra stability, or both? And third, this one's a bit more technical, but most studies measure growth using ultrasound. It's fast, it's cheap, and I've used it myself in past videos, but it has limits. Not every muscle can be accurately measured with ultrasound. And for the ones that can, it only provides a snapshot of a muscle by looking at the thickness, often at just one point. This is an issue, especially with stretch research, as muscles don't grow evenly from top to bottom. So while one region might look like it grew more, it could have grown less in other areas. But now comes the hard part. How do you actually design a study that fills in these 3 gaps? First, I reached out to my local university and put together a research team. And we also collaborated with some of the smartest minds in the field, including Brett Contreras and Kassem Hansen, to build the plan. The goal? To test muscles that rarely ever get studied and to see if the benefits of a stretch would hold up. And because these are muscles that can't be measured accurately using ultrasound, we needed to get the gold standard, MRI, which left us with just one more problem left to solve. So we wanted to test if an exercise that's hardest in the stretch actually builds more muscle compared to if we could somehow make that same exercise hardest in the squeeze. If the stretch grew more muscle, it would validate every exercise swap and adjustment science-based lifters have been recommending for years. But if the squeeze built more muscle, that would mean all those recommendations weren't necessary, or even worse, were actually hurting your gains. But how exactly do you take the same exercise and make it harder in the stretch for one group and then harder in the squeeze for another?
So here's the thing, you actually always want the exercise to be a little bit easier in the stretch position. And this is because of the changes in the overlap of the actin and myosin filaments in your muscle fiber. As the muscle reaches a more lengthened position, the thick and the thin filament, the actin and myosin filaments, they do not produce as much cross-bridging. Therefore, they do not produce as much muscle force. This is why you are weaker in the stretch position. So a well-designed machine or a good exercise would actually reduce the amount of load or resistance in the stretch position to accommodate this change in actin and myosin overlap. Now this guy behind me, Arthur Jones, discovered that in the 1970s. And this is why he created the Nautilus cam. And that's where the name Nautilus comes from. The large cams that were placed on these machines that looked like Nautilus shells changed the moment arm throughout the range of motion to reduce the amount of resistance where the actin and myosin overlapped less and where the muscle could not produce as much force, and it would add resistance in positions where the muscles are able to produce the most amount of force. So this is something we've known for several decades, but for some reason the fitness industry just doesn't seem to catch on. You don't want to universally increase the resistance in the contracted position. And this is because you have something called excessive actin and myosin overlap, which is the opposite of less actin myosin overlap in the stretch position. So as a muscle fully contracts, the actin and myosin filaments start to bend and get in each other's way. And this reduces the amount of cross-bridging that can happen between the filaments and reduces the amount of overall force that muscle can produce. So believe it or not, the muscles can produce the most force somewhere in the middle of the range of motion. And the muscle produces significantly less force in the stretch and slightly less force in the fully contracted position. So by arbitrarily increasing the resistance in the contraction is just as backwards as increasing resistance in the stretch.
And that is where our equipment became the key to the whole experiment. Prime Fitness USA, they provided us with 3 custom machines for lateral raises, hip extensions, pec flies, and reverse plies. But here is a really cool part. So with a simple turn of a knob, we could change the resistance profile instantly. With this knob, we can make pec flies brutally hard in the beginning when the chest is stretched, or hardest at the end when it's fully squeezed. But aside from that one change, the exercise and the range of motion stays exactly the same, meaning the only thing that could affect growth was whether the movement was hardest in the stretch or in the squeeze. It was the cleanest test of stretch versus squeeze ever done. From here, we recruited 20 subjects, both men and women. And while 20 people might sound like a small sample size, we use a unique design that controls genetics, diet, and all other individual variables that usually muddy the results. It's called a within subjects design, which splits each person in half. One side of their body did the stretch focus training, and the other side did the squeeze focus training. This now makes our 20 subject study statistically much stronger than a regular study with well over 40 subjects. And my hypothesis, as well as the hypothesis from the rest of our research team, was that the stretch side would no doubt outperform the squeeze side.
Pressure on the heel, nice and tall, and then we're sweeping that leg down and back. Good, and controlling up.
However, when I got to talk to some of our test subjects, most of them were predicting the exact opposite.
I think my left leg, which is the one that gets harder near the end, is going to more.
Really? Okay.
Just because it's harder.
JJ is my friend, and I enrolled him in the study. And I mean, like, ever since like 2 weeks ago, I just kind of noticed he was getting some wicked gains on his shoulders.
Is one shoulder noticeably bigger than the other?
That I don't know. I don't know.
Okay.
But definitely there's been some size growth. We'll see. We'll see in the MRIs though.
Interesting.
But to ensure no one's bias would actually influence the results, we blinded everything. The MRI analyst nor a statistician knew which side was which, and I didn't see any results until the stats were finalized. Now, analyzing the MRI data alone took Adam Jones, our head researcher, over 200 hours, as every single image had to be manually outlined and measured. But our adherence was insanely high, 97%. Out of 400 possible workouts, 388 were attended. And as a result, most people's muscles grew by around 20% bigger, which is excellent for just 10 weeks. And it makes it more likely that if there was a difference favoring one side, we'd be able to catch it. And the results we found didn't just challenge my views, but also that of my fellow science nerd, Jeff Nippert, who had some interesting thoughts when I showed him the results. But we'll get to that in a bit. So, which side grew more, stretch or squeeze? Now, before I say the winner, I want you to take and guess which side won. No cheating by skipping ahead. Stretch or squeeze, just lock in your answer.
If I had to guess which side grew more, I would say if intensity of effort was controlled and the subjects were lifting to muscle failure, the results were exactly the same between the two. Let's see what they found.
Okay, so after $40,000 spent and a year of hard work, our results were chest, same growth. Side delts, same growth. Rear delts, same growth. And glutes, same growth. Every single muscle grew the exact same amount on both sides.
Now keep in mind, guys, I didn't even watch this video yet. But of course I was going to predict that the growth was exactly the same, because this stuff is not new. This stuff has been researched decades ago, comparing different positions of the range of motion and hypertrophy. And the fact that the fitness industry is just catching on to something that we've known for decades is pretty alarming, especially when they're science-based influencers and science-based coaches. Apparently, they haven't actually read the science, because the science has been there for a long, long time. And that is exactly why I predicted you're getting the same amount of growth. And if you looked at any of my older videos, whenever someone asked me a question or I had to address what's better for growth, stretch training, this type of training, that type of training, my answer is always the same. If intensity of effort is controlled, you're gonna experience the same growth in the long run. There's not much you can do to a repetition or an exercise to dramatically increase its effectiveness when it comes to making your muscles grow, other than training with the highest amount of effort possible. So when people are hitting their plateaus or people are not seeing good results, they tend to try new methods, different repetition schemes, different volumes, frequencies, thinking that that is the piece that's missing and that's what's going to kickstart their results. But I always say, what they're missing is the intensity. They're missing knowing how to push their body as hard as they can and they should be to stimulate optimal growth. And this is something I spend several weeks with my clients in my coaching program, teaching them, ingraining it into their nervous system and into their brain, helping them learn exactly how to push their body to that highest threshold where you're getting the most muscle fiber recruitment and the most growth. And once people learn this, their results skyrocket. So if this sounds like you, if you've hit a plateau or you're just not seeing the results that you want to see, click the link below and I'll show you how I could take you from average physique to jacked physique just by teaching you how to train your muscles correctly. Because training to true muscle failure or true high intensity effort training, it's not something you're going to learn from a YouTube video. It's not even something you're going to learn if I were to take you through a one-on-one workout one time. It's something that must be taught, shown, and practiced for several weeks. But once you learn it, you're good. You can't unlearn it, and now you're gonna get the best results for the rest of your life. So don't waste your time in the gym. If you're not seeing results, click the link below and let me give you results. Probably something along the lines of 5 to 10 pounds in the first 8 workouts, and I'm not even kidding.
There weren't even trends suggesting that one side performed better. We even reported growth at 3 points along each muscle to see if maybe the stretch affected certain regions more, as well as one total volume comparison. Still, same growth. I was honestly shocked. But when I dug deeper into the data, which I'll show you in a second, it actually explains why so many of us were misled. Which leads me to our final question. What do these results mean? And what are the stretch-focused exercises that actually matter? Okay, so after comparing data from our study against past research in the field, I noticed a few things. First, when it comes to the stretch everybody keeps talking about, it's not all one thing. In fact, I would say it's actually 3 different ideas that just get mashed together. The first of which is what I'm going to call the degree of stretch. So not all muscles are built to stretch the same way. Some of them, which are mainly found in your hamstrings, quads, calves, and triceps, they're biarticulate. And that just means they cross 2 joints, which lets them stretch further than most other muscles. And here's the important part. Studies consistently show that exercises that stretch these muscles more grow them faster. And because these muscles are also some of the cheapest and easiest to test, it makes sense why so many studies found stretch training to be more effective. Now, the second way the stretch gets applied to training is through basic range of motion. So how deep you go on each rep. And again, studies find that the stretch position, often the bottom part of a movement, tends to be the most important part for growth. So if you're simply not going deep enough on an exercise to reach that point, that will most definitely limit your gains.
That's actually not true at all if intensity of effort is controlled. The reason some subjects see better growth when they're going further in the range of motion is because there's more effort involved. But if you took the group that didn't go deep in the stretch on a chest press or deep in the stretch on a squat, and you had them train to an appropriate level of intensity similar to what I teach, they would get the exact same amount of growth. In fact, I've had clients that put on over 10 pounds of muscle with no range of motion at all, simply statically contracting their muscles to failure without any movement involved at all. And this is because intensity of effort is the most important part of muscle fiber recruitment. So what he said is actually not true. And the reason is, in these studies, they generally don't control for intensity of effort well. They generally have people lifting to volitional fatigue or the point where they think they can't get another rep. But if you had a good instructor taking people all the way to real muscle failure, the results would be exactly the same.
And again, nothing in our study contradicts these findings, as both our stretch group and our squeeze group were still completing a full range of motion each rep. What our study tested was the third and most misunderstood piece of the stretch conversation, the resistance profile. Does making an exercise harder in the stretch actually lead to more growth? And from our study, the answer is a clear no. As long as the exercise takes your muscle through a full range of motion and there's at least some tension in the stretch, it doesn't seem to matter if the hardest part is at the bottom or the top. And these findings, they actually line up with another brand new study published just this year that compared cable lateral raises to dumbbell lateral raises. Even though one of them was designed to be hardest at the bottom in the stretch and the other hardest at the top during the squeeze, both led to similar shoulder growth. But I first want to cover some of the limitations of our study. For one, we used untrained subjects. Now, some argue that beginners grow from almost anything, so they're not ideal for detecting smaller differences between training methods. And while that is a fair point, it's also worth noting that most research in this area does use untrained participants and still finds clear differences between the groups. But I do think that for well-trained lifters like myself, doing something new can often spark growth. And I actually think this happened to me. After years of only doing dumbbell lateral raises, which challenged my shoulders hardest in the squeeze, switching to cable lateral raises at hip height to make it harder during the stretch seemed to grow my shoulders much faster.
So this can potentially be true, but it's not because your body is experiencing something new. It's not about muscle confusion or all that utter nonsense. The reason is when you do an exercise for a long period of time, you become very neurologically efficient at it. And if you are not properly progressively overloading as you get stronger, say you're doing the same weight, the same reps, not training to failure every workout, well, your body's going to adapt and be able to do the exercise more easily. And that's where sometimes people find plateaus. And then when you do a new exercise that your body hasn't adapted to neurologically yet, that exercise is going to be much harder for your body because your body's not going to be as efficient at performing that exercise. And the body adapts so specifically that even if you did a lateral raise machine for a while and then went to a different lateral raise machine that looked almost identical but it was made by a different brand, this would be enough change in the muscle fiber recruitment pattern and the skill to where that new machine, even though it looks just like the old one, would be much harder and probably, if you're not training with high enough intensity to begin with, probably be more effective. But there's a workaround for this. The workaround is track your workouts, progressively overload appropriately, and you would never ever have to switch your workouts or change your exercises. Personally, I've been doing the same exercise for the last 10 years and I've continued to grow along with all of my clients. What I do with my clients is we find the best exercise based on the equipment, their anatomy, and exercises that provide the most stability and the least amount of skill to perform. And then once we find those exercises, you can pretty much stick with them for the rest of your life as long as you are properly tracking your workouts and progressively overloading. This is something I teach in my coaching as well, so if you need help with this, click that link below and stop wasting your time.
Hip thrusts, for example, can be just as good as squats for your glutes. Reverse dumbbell flies can be just as good as cables. And chest flies might just build your chest as much as the bench press, which is all great to know.
This is another thing that I've been saying for the last 10 years. It really doesn't matter the exercise you choose as long as you are addressing the target muscle, training it hard, progressively overloading, and not doing too much volume or frequency. The fitness industry seems to be obsessed with exercise selection. But exercise selection does not play as much of a role as people think. You could do a chest press or a chest fly, a squat or a hip thrust, a barbell curl or a machine curl. It really doesn't matter as long as you are addressing one of the primary functions of that target muscle area. So again, told you so. Now let's hear what Jeff Nippard has to say about the findings that Jeremy Ethier found.
Do these findings change your, I guess, your thoughts on some of the exercises that you may have thought are like better for growth?
Kind of. Yeah, I mean, I think with the pecs, that's probably the one that I'm like, okay, well, now you know what? You don't get a little bit of extra range of motion by doing the bench press.
See, the thing is, we've known for several decades that the range of motion is sort of irrelevant when it comes to stimulating muscle hypertrophy if the intensity is high enough. But more range of motion is not going to recruit any more muscle fibers than using a relatively short range of motion. Although there is a neurological aspect to that, where some people will literally only be able to demonstrate that improved strength in the ranges of motion that they train in, which is why we definitely want to use some range of motion in most cases. But this comes from an improvement in strength perspective. But when it comes to muscle growth, range of motion, irrelevant.
There's anyone in the evidence-based field who would be like, no, 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 like the stretch is literally number one.
Actually, Mike Israetel does promote the stretch as being the number one most important aspect of your training, which is why you see him use these ridiculous ranges of motion with really bad form. And Jeff Nippert has actually been promoting this for the last couple of years. So it's kind of weird how he would say that in response to the findings, considering he was heavily promoting training in the stretch position for quite a long time.
Building on what we have, questioning what we don't, and refining our stance as we learn more.
See, we've found over the last 50 years pretty much everything there is to find in terms of stimulating muscle and stimulating physical adaptation. The principles are simple. Push your body with high intensity, don't do too much, don't train too often, and don't hurt yourself in the process. So it's my opinion that exercise science doesn't really have anything new that they're going to discover that's going to make a significant difference in your ability to do this. What exercise science should be focusing on is finding more efficient and safer way to stimulate improvements in physical adaptation. Not these new, crazy, and frankly silly techniques that are potentially going to provide 1 or 2% more muscle growth and more gain, because in the long run, that small percentage of improvement isn't even going to be noticeable. Just think of it this way. Are you going to notice 1 or 2% more muscle growth in the mirror? Absolutely not. That's why it's a waste of time to tweeze through all this new literature and all this new research, then try to find some magic technique that's going to take your average physique to an elite physique, because there just isn't one, and there's never going to be one. So to wrap up this response video, I think what Jeremy Ethier did here was brilliant. I think intuitively, he probably knew that this stretch training fad was kind of nonsense, and he spent his own time, energy, and resources to show that it's nonsense. And the fact that we have fitness influencers funding and conducting their own studies against what the exercise researchers are publishing should be a clear indication of the poor direction exercise science is headed these days. So thank you, Jeremy Ethier, for taking your time, spending your own money to find the truth about one of the latest fads in resistance training. You did an excellent job, and I think this is going to help a lot of people preserve their joints and not waste their time in the gym. And that's exactly what my channel does. I provide actual evidence-based training recommendations so you can get the best results and literally transform your body with just 2 short workouts a week. And if you want a step-by-step guide on how to apply high-intensity training to get insane results while only spending as much as an hour a week in the gym like I have, check out my do-it-yourself program at goldenerasystem.com. And if you want one-on-one attention and one-on-one coaching to unlock the full potential of your physique that you almost certainly have not unlocked yet, again, click the link in the description, join my coaching program, and I will help you transform your average physique to something that will be unrecognizable by your friends and family, and by only using a handful of science-based principles instead of all this other garbage that you see ruining the fitness industry today. Don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, and the bell notification icon so you can be notified when I drop more videos that are going to help you get in shape, save your joints, and of course, save your time.